or another, they fully realized that in a social context, religion must be non-denominational. You can have your own private metaphysical beliefs, and you, but if we're going to get along, then you can't claim moral superiority by virtue of your metaphysical beliefs. And I think it's absolutely central.
There's another side to this. The diversity of religious views, metaphysical views, moral views, scientific views is as much solution as it is problem. It's a sign of the health of a nation that its conversation reaches out to consider not just one or two or three voices, but 10 or 50 or 100. What I fear is some sort of monopolistic intellectual, moral, political view taking over what everybody thinks, and once you've got the absolute truth, of course, you don't need to learn anything more. You've got the absolute truth, and that's the trouble with absolute truth. It brings learning to an end. If God told you that this is the final truth, well, that's kind of it, isn't it? But it prevents you or your community from learning. And what communities do best when they're diverse is learn from our ongoing experience. We modify our laws. We change our economic practices. We change what we what we believe. We invent new technologies, and we keep getting better and better and wiser, and knock on wood, happier and happier. I prize religious diversity, and I think America is one of the best examples of it in human history. It's one of the reasons why we're a great nation.
The injection of science into the moral sciences, I mean, where do you see that going?
Well, this really raises the issue of neuroethics, and here's kind of how I see the developments in the last 10 years that I think are really, really very interesting. One is that as we understand the nature of social groups from an evolutionary perspective, we see that there are great advantages for organisms to live in groups, whether it's wolves or chimps or birds or humans. And the biologists like Hamilton and Axelrod and so forth also realized that it isn't just, of course, physical traits that have a genetic basis. It's also certain behavioral patterns. And so, together with other people like Robert Frank who do the modeling, it was pretty quickly realized that if you're going to have social groups, you also have to have, or nature has likely selected for, certain kinds of social dispositions. The disposition to cooperate, to share, to teach, and the disposition to punish the miscreants. That is, those who would otherwise threaten the well-being of the group or who are violent or antisocial in a certain way get punished. And so I think that the great benefit that we've seen come out of sociobiology, and here I'm particularly thinking of Ed Wilson, is to see that the foundations of morals, cooperation, altruism, sharing, punishment, and so forth, really does reside in the genetic story. And that, of course, for most animals that are social, there's also this enormous capacity to learn, and that what they learn are the prevailing institutions and norms of the group, but that also those norms can change over time, especially if you have a highly flexible brain, such as the human brain. And so I think we're kind of learning both to look at at ethics as fundamentally rooted in our neurobiology, but also to see, as Dewey did actually, to see various institutions, social justice institutions of the courts, of schools and other things, as kind of social experiments. That legislation to have a certain kind of a tax rather than another is a kind of social experiment, and that part of the story, so there's the biological part of the story, and then this part of the story is politics in its broadest sense, where we try to figure out how we can negotiate with each other so that we can keep going, and what might work well and what might have consequences long down the road that will be most unfortunate.
I mean, so you see a direct application, direct application of science to social policy then?
In the following sense, that I think there is much that we can learn as we develop social policy from understanding the nature of the brain itself. Now, let me just qualify that. It doesn't mean that we're going to learn some neurobiological fact from which we're going to say, aha, well, here's the policy that we ought to have.
Let me interrupt you there.
Yeah.
Let's take a case that we know about, which is being called the MAOA mutants. Okay.
Yes.
So, in fact, perhaps you'd like to explain that.
Yes, the MAOA mutant story is really very interesting, but the heart of the story goes like this, that there is a mutation carried on the X chromosome for a protein called monoamine oxidase A, MAOA. And what that protein normally does in the brain is regulate the reuptake of the neurotransmitter serotonin, which is largely in prefrontal structures. The MAOA mutants do not produce very much of that protein. And consequently, there is an abnormality in the serotonin reuptake, which means that there is an abnormality in the serotonin levels that regulate prefrontal organization. Behaviorally, what's that all mean? Behaviorally, it means that these people really tend to lack the capacity for self-control and are often very aggressive and violent in a way that's harmful to themselves, or self-destructively violent.
Isn't it the case that that's particular if they were abused as children?
And the other half of it is that the probability that an MAOA mutant will show the behavioral pattern goes way up if, in addition, they were abused as children. So it has raised questions in people's mind about exactly to what degree we should hold them responsible for their behavior. They do not, of course, qualify for the insanity defense. They do not really qualify as incompetent to stand trial. So as the law now stands, they are treated the way anybody else should be. And, of course, the issue is complicated because these are not nice people. They are very dangerous, and they do very horrible things impulsively. So it can't be the case that we just say, well, bad luck, you're an MAOA mutant, so, run along now and try to be nice. You can't do that.
But can you do screen for them? Isn't that just
So one thing you might do is at least raise the question of screening all male infants to see which are MAOA mutants, and perhaps do something to intervene to ensure that they do not receive an abusive upbringing.
That's kind of scary intervention, isn't it? But
it's a very scary intervention.
Plainly, the best solution is that nobody should receive an abused childhood.
Well,
a great intervention.
Yeah, because the important thing actually was also that this study found that even if you were not an MAOA mutant and you had an abusive childhood, the probability of showing violent behavior goes way up. So it's something we know. And it's like knowing that you must not drink alcohol when you're pregnant.
Right.
And so this is something that's very clear, very well understood at this point. But so far, I don't think there has been any activity on the part of family, the various family groups, like Focus on the Family. I think they are not interested in this issue at all.
But obviously regulating that would be a very tricky issue. It's a very, very tricky. But on the other hand,
Well,
what is responsible and what is not responsible? I mean,
Yeah.
how far does your argument go?